On October 9th, 2012, was the last day that 19-year-old student Lizzie Marriott was seen alive. After her university classes, she stopped by the home where she was temporarily staying with her relatives, Tony and Becky Hanna, and left a note on the table for them. In it, the girl said she was going to a friend's house and promised to return no later than midnight. But Lizzie never showed up, neither that evening nor the next day. Her disappearance was the beginning of a mystery that later turned into a horrific story. Lizzie's car was found in the university parking lot. It stood there as if she had simply vanished into thin air, leaving no clues behind. Initially, the police treated this as a routine missing persons case, but the investigation soon took on a sinister tone. Details gradually emerged that indicated Lizzie may have been the victim of a brutal crime. The story of her disappearance became a reminder of how trust and kindness can turn into tragedy. Lizzie was a typical young girl who dreamed of a bright future. She was studying marine biology at the University of New Hampshire, fascinated by marine life and their world. To save on housing, she moved in with her relatives, Tony and Becky Hanna, who took her in like their own daughter. They lived in Chester, a 2-hour drive from Lizzie's family home in Massachusetts. Despite the distance, the girl maintained a close relationship with her parents, Bob and Melissa Marriott, who were always proud of their daughter. Her new life in Chester brought Lizzie joy. She found a job at the Target store, where she quickly earned respect among her colleagues. This is where she met 18-year-old Kat McDonough, with whom she hit it off. The girls often spent time together after work, and on one occasion, Lizzie even visited Kat's house. So when Kat invited her over again on October 9th, Lizzie agreed without hesitation. The plan was simple: have lunch, watch a movie, and spend the evening in pleasant company. However, they were joined by another acquaintance, 30-year-old Seth Mazzaglia. Lizzie didn't mind, as Seth seemed like an interesting person. Seth was a graduate of the same university where Lizzie studied, but he specialized in theater arts. In addition, he had a paramedic diploma, a black belt in karate, and even taught martial arts. His personality aroused interest, and Lizzie seemed to be delighted with the new acquaintance. The evening promised to be light and carefree. But by crossing the threshold of the apartment, Lizzie took the last step of her life. She never returned home. When Lizzie didn't show up at the appointed time, Tony and Becky decided to wait until the evening of the next day, assuming she might have stayed overnight at a friend's house. However, with each passing hour, the alarm grew. Lizzie's disappearance did not fit into her usual rhythm of life. She had always been responsible and punctual, so her absence caused panic. A search began, which later turned into one of the highest-profile investigations in the region. This story is not just about a disappearance. It is a reminder of how easily trust can become a weapon against you. Lizzie, who had always believed in the goodness of people, fell victim to those who crossed not only the law, but all moral norms. Her story reminds us, one person's freedom ends where another's safety begins. But for Lizzie, this realization came too late. On October 10th, when Lizzie still hadn't shown up at home, Tony and Becky Hanna, overwhelmed with anxiety, decided to contact her parents. However, Bob and Melissa Marriott also knew nothing about their daughter's whereabouts. Realizing the situation was serious, they immediately set off for Chester, notifying the police about the disappearance along the way. The search resumed with renewed vigor. Lizzie's friends, colleagues from the store, and volunteers who cared about the girl's fate joined in. The police began questioning everyone who might know something about Lizzie. Tony and Becky couldn't say exactly who she had gone to that evening, but friends helped restore her possible contacts. One of Lizzie's acquaintances, Nate McNeil, recalled that she might have been at Kat McDonough's. He also said that when he asked Kat about Lizzie, she replied that she hadn't seen her. This seemed suspicious, and detectives began checking this information. In parallel, investigators found out that there had been no transactions from Lizzie's bank account, and her phone was turned off. The version about a possible accident was discarded when her car was found in the university campus parking lot. It stood there as if Lizzie had simply left it and walked somewhere. This only added mystery to her disappearance. Lizzie's parents, Bob and Melissa, announced a $10,000 reward for any information that would help find their daughter. This attracted public attention, but also forced investigators to delve deeper into Lizzie's life and her surroundings. During interviews with the girl's friends and colleagues, disturbing details about Kat McDonough and her boyfriend, Seth Mazzalia, began to emerge. As it turned out, their lifestyle was significantly different from what they showed in public. Kat, who had once been cheerful and open, became withdrawn and rude after starting a relationship with Seth. Her colleagues from the store said that she limited communication even with relatives who did not approve of her choice. The age difference, Seth was 30 and Kat only 18, raised suspicions. But it wasn't just that worried those around them. Something about Seth's behavior seemed unhealthy, unnatural. The police began to study the couple in more detail. It turned out that they met when Kat was only 17, and after she became an adult, they moved in together to Seth's apartment in Dover, New Hampshire. Although there were no clues about Seth or Kat in the police databases, their social media profiles raised questions. In particular, it became clear that their relationship was far from traditional. They practiced unusual forms of interactions that might be related to Lizzie's disappearance. These details became another piece of the puzzle in the complex mosaic of the investigation. The police began to suspect that Lizzie could have been the victim not just of a random crime, but of something much more sinister. The arrest of Seth Mazzalia was only the beginning of revealing the truth that was hiding behind the facade of a young girl's ordinary life, who simply wanted to spend an evening with friends. During the investigation into Lizzie Marriott's disappearance, detectives stumbled upon a shocking find. On one of the sites where users exchanged ads, they discovered a post published under the pseudonym Miss Scarlet. The author, who presented herself as a vampire actress, was looking for a live-in slave. The ad listed requirements: cleaning the house, washing dishes, doing laundry, preparing food, and being ready for intimate relations at any time. This post, as it turned out, belonged to Kat McDonough. She described her relationship with Seth Mazzalia in detail, using terms from the BDM world. Kat mentioned that their relationship was built on the principles of dominant-submissive, where Seth played the role of the complete controller, and she was the obedient partner. In her ad, Kat added Gothic-style photos that emphasized her vampire image. This information became key for investigators. It became obvious that Kat and Seth's relationship was far from traditional. It was built not on love or mutual respect, but on control, submission, and possibly violence. The police began to suspect that Lizzie could have become a victim of this unusual dynamic. On October 12th, Kat and Seth were called in for questioning. They were interrogated simultaneously but in different rooms, which allowed investigators to compare their testimonies. Kat insisted that she hadn't seen Lizzie on October 9th, and after a few hours of questioning, she refused to give any further explanations at all. Seth, on the other hand, was more talkative. He confessed that Lizzie was indeed at their apartment that evening. At first, everything seemed innocent. They watched a movie, played strip poker, and then engaged in intimate relations as a threesome. According to Seth, no one objected, and everyone agreed to what was happening. During the process, he tied both girls up with ropes, but at some point something went wrong. Lizzie suddenly stopped showing signs of life. Seth claimed it was an accident. In a state of shock and fear of the consequences, he and Kat took Lizzie's body to Pierce Island and threw it off a cliff into the river. After that, they returned home, trying to act as if nothing had happened. During the interrogation, Seth described his actions in detail and even agreed to accompany the police to the place where, according to him, they got rid of the body. On October 13th, Seth Mazzaglia was charged with murder. This news was a devastating blow to Lizzie's family. Her mother, Melissa Marriott, admitted that she felt something was wrong, but hoped until the end that her daughter would be found alive. Lizzie's father, Bob Marriott, organized a candlelight memorial service to honor his daughter's memory. However, Lizzie's relatives refused to believe Seth's version. They knew that their daughter was in a relationship with a girl named Brittany and valued that relationship very much. The parents insisted that Lizzie would never agree to intimacy with strangers, especially under such extreme conditions. Lizzie's family appealed to the police to continue the search for her body so they could say goodbye to her. Volunteers and a private detective, who promised to do everything possible to find the truth, joined the search. But even despite Seth's confession, many questions remained unanswered. What really happened that evening? Was it an accident or a brutal crime? And where was Lizzie's body, which still hadn't been found? This story took on increasingly grim hues, and investigators had to uncover all its secrets. The river where, according to Seth, Lizzie's body was thrown, was known for its strong currents. Investigators speculated that her remains could have already been carried out into the Atlantic Ocean, which greatly complicated the search. However, the investigation continued, and the police continued to gather evidence. One of the key stages was a search of Seth and Kat's apartment. The housing turned out to be messy and neglected, which contrasted with their public image. Detectives noted that Seth was interested in the occult and black magic, which added even more eeriness to his image. However, despite a thorough search, nothing was found in the apartment that directly indicated involvement in Lizzie's disappearance. Then, the investigators decided to inspect the surrounding area. In one of the dumpsters, they found a bag with strange contents: black leather gloves, a hoodie, and men's underwear. DNA examination confirmed that the underwear contained traces of Seth and Lizzie, which was evidence of their intimate closeness. Lizzie's family also recognized the hoodie as her personal item, but the gloves caused a surprise. If they were used during the games, why were they thrown away? This led investigators to the idea that Seth might have deliberately concealed the actual events of that evening, replacing them with a version convenient for himself. On October 17th, Kat McDonough finally broke her silence and gave testimony. She said that on October 9th, Lizzie came to her home, where Seth later joined them. At first, the girls spent time together, but soon Seth joined them, trying to create a relaxed atmosphere. According to Kat, everything happened by mutual consent. It started with light touches and kisses, and when Seth suggested tying Lizzie up with ropes, she agreed. Kat even showed how exactly Seth did it. However, as she claimed, suddenly Lizzie had an attack. She began to suffocate and lost consciousness. Seth and Kat tried to help her, but Lizzie was no longer breathing. Kat insisted that it was an accident, and no one was to blame for her death. However, her testimony raised doubts among investigators. Soon, a young woman named Catherine Fish contacted the police, introducing herself as Seth's ex-girlfriend. She stated that she had important information about the Lizzie case. Catherine said that she had dated Seth about 10 years ago. At first, he seemed like an attentive and sincere man who gave gifts and showed care. But everything changed when their relationship moved to an intimate level. Catherine discovered that Seth was interested in BDM, and although she was initially curious to try something new, over time his behavior began to frighten her. Seth did not tolerate being contradicted, and once, in a burst of frankness, he shared with Catherine his eerie fantasy about taking someone's life. This testimony was a new twist in the case. Investigators began to delve deeper into Seth's past, looking for evidence of his possible involvement in other crimes. But the main question remained open. What really happened to Lizzie Marriott? Was her death an accident or a brutal crime disguised as games? Lizzie's family continued to insist that their daughter would never have agreed to such extreme actions. They believed that the truth would eventually surface and promised to fight for justice to the end. This moment became a turning point in their relationship. During one argument, Seth grabbed Catherine by the throat and began to strangle her. She begged him to stop, but he didn't listen, only squeezing her neck tighter. This incident finally destroyed her attachment to him. Catherine stayed with Seth only because of financial dependence. They moved to another city where she had no friends or relatives, and Seth completely provided for her. She lived with him, waiting for the right moment to escape. Over time, Seth began to talk about how they needed a third partner for their intimate encounters. He would bring various girls home, but none of them stayed long. Eventually, he began to insist on a permanent partner, and Catherine felt even more intimidated. Despite the fear, Catherine found the strength to escape. She traveled thousands of kilometers to return to her parents. After that, she never saw Seth again, and her testimony only intensified the investigators' suspicions about his involvement in Lizzie's death. In May 2014, Seth Mazalia stood trial. The prosecution insisted on his guilt not only in premeditated murder, but also in violence. Numerous witnesses testified against him, including Kat McDonough. She was arrested shortly before the trial, charged with obstructing justice and the investigation. After 2 months in prison, Kat had enough time to rethink everything that had happened. Initially, she actively corresponded with Seth, and together they dreamed of escaping to a country where extradition doesn't apply. They planned to get married and raise children. However, these plans fell apart. At the end of 2012, Seth proposed a plan to his cellmate, Ryan Bachman, who was about to be released. Seth gave him access to his money so that he could buy illegal drugs, sell them, and increase the amount in the account. With this money, they planned to buy weapons, 2 cars, explosives, and a boat. But Bachman used the funds at his own discretion, and soon this plan became known to the authorities. After the failure, Seth abandoned his escape attempts and wrote a letter to Kat, hinting at a meeting in the afterlife, as if suggesting she commit suicide. Over time, Kat's fear of Seth began to wane, and in 2014, when the prosecution offered her a deal, she agreed without hesitation. Under the terms of the deal, Kat had to tell the whole truth about the events of the evening of October 9th, and in return, her 20-year sentence was reduced to 3 years. In her testimony, Kat admitted that she was under Seth's complete control, who gradually broke her will and deprived her of independence. A month and a half before the tragedy, Seth had sent her a message demanding she find a third partner as soon as possible, as Kat was going on a 10-day theater tour, and he didn't want to be alone. But Kat was unable to find a suitable girl. Later, the tone of Seth's messages changed. The orders were supplemented with threats and promises of reprisals if she didn't fulfill his demands. In extreme cases, Kat had to bring one of her friends. In the end, she invited Lizzie, who agreed, trusting her and not suspecting that there would be more than just the 2 of them at the gathering. Seth had seen photos of Lizzie and was eagerly awaiting the meeting. However, when the evening did not go according to plan, he was consumed with rage and disappointment. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, Lizzie arrived at the apartment. where she was greeted by Kat and Seth. At first, the girls spent time together, but soon Seth joined them, trying to create a relaxed atmosphere. They turned on a movie, and Seth suggested playing strip poker, planning to move on to intimacy. The game was going calmly, but Lizzie gradually lost until she was left in only her underwear. At one point, Seth suggested that she kiss Kat, but Lizzie refused, explaining that she was in a relationship and didn't want to cheat on her girlfriend. Sometime later, Seth made another attempt, suggesting that Lizzie go somewhere private with him, but again, he heard a categorical refusal. Enraged, he went into the room, where he put on black leather gloves and took a rope. Then he imperceptibly returned and stood behind the unsuspecting Lizzie. When he threw the rope around her neck, the girl didn't even have time to scream. Seth strangled her in cold blood, showing no hint of remorse. After the murder, he desecrated her body. All this time, Kat was sitting nearby, gripped by horror and fear that by resisting, she could become the next victim. She claimed that she did not dare to intervene due to the paralyzing fear. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, they wrapped Lizzie's body in a tarp and put it in a suitcase, which they then transferred to her car. They went to the river on Pierce Island, where they descended to the observation deck, took the body out of the suitcase, and threw it off the cliff into the water. After that, they thoroughly cleaned the car and returned it to the campus parking lot, then walked 6 miles home. Kat explained that she was in a state of shock and did not fully realize what was happening, and later she was afraid to testify against Seth. This testimony became decisive in the case. Seth Mazzalia was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Lizzie Marriott by strangulation, as well as violence and criminal conspiracy. The 32-year-old man was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kat McDonough, who was 20 years old at the time, received the promised 3 years in prison and was released in 2016. Since then, nothing has been known about her. She did not appear on social networks under her own name, and it is believed that she returned to her parents. Lizzie's body was never found, and her family was unable to organize a full-fledged funeral. In memory of their daughter, they installed a bench on the shore of the lake in her hometown. Bob and Melissa Marriott consider Kat's sentence too lenient and continue to believe that her guilt in the tragedy is also great. They admit that the killer has been punished, but they do not consider this complete justice. Lizzie is gone, but her tragedy can become an important lesson for other girls. The story of Lizzie Marriott is not just a tale of crime and injustice. It is a reminder of how important it is to be attentive to your surroundings, to be able to recognize danger and act when something goes wrong. This tragedy could have been prevented if someone who knew about Seth and Kat's unhealthy relationship had sounded the alarm in time. Attention to alarming signals is what could have saved Lizzie. Kat McDonough had been under Seth's psychological pressure for years. Her change in behavior, isolation from family and friends, fear, and dependence were all obvious signs that could have been a reason for intervention. If one of her loved ones had paid attention to these changes earlier, perhaps the story would have turned out differently. But most importantly, do not remain silent. Roberto and Paul, who came to Seth's apartment on the night of the murder, saw that something was wrong. However, they decided not to intervene, fearing problems with the law. If they had called the police or an ambulance, Lizzie might have been saved. Education and awareness are what can prevent such tragedies. Many victims of violence do not even realize that they are in danger. It is important to talk about how to recognize manipulation, psychological pressure, and other forms of violence. Lizzie, who trusted Kat, could not even imagine what awaited her. Supporting victims is another key point. Kat could have escaped from Seth earlier if she had had enough support. Many victims of violence remain with their abusers out of fear, financial dependence, or a sense of hopelessness. Society must create conditions so that everyone can find help. And, of course, reaction to threats. When Seth started threatening Kat, she could have turned to law enforcement, but the fear and control he had over her made her helpless. It is important to remember, no one has the right to threaten your life or freedom. Lizzie's tragedy reminds us that freedom and security are not something that is owed. It is something we must fight for every day. We must be careful, trust our intuition, and not be afraid to speak up when we see injustice. Lizzie remained a symbol of the fight for truth and justice. Her story is a reminder that each of us can contribute to preventing such tragedies. If this story made you think, be sure to subscribe to my channel, Detective Brooks Stories. Here, you will find many more shocking, disturbing, and educational investigations that reveal the dark corners of human psychology and the criminal world. Click the subscribe button so you don't miss new videos. Thank you for being with us until the end. And remember, your attentiveness can save someone's life.